Oh, hello, everybody. All right. It's good to see y'all today. We having yet another episode of This Week in Supervision. And I was like, man, we better go live or we're not gonna go at all because I keep finding problems, having tech issues. But I want to talk to you all today a little bit about what we talked about in supervision. And I'm hoping that I can be able to put this out without chopping it up too much. But we want to talk a little bit about the impact or the unexpected outcomes of a controlling parent, because many times I don't know that we always are able to capture the impact of having a controlling parent. What are the outcomes of that child, and how does that impact them while they're a child, when they become adult, and how they end up interacting in relationships. Anyway, I don't want to go too deep, as I always say, but I want to kind of jump into this. And of course, the reason why we do this is because we're trying to break down, for those of you all who are providing supervision or just trying to learn more about how to execute with your clients, trying to introduce a different way of looking at things that might be helpful. And so the example that I'm wanting to use today is with a gentleman. His name is Alex Hermosi, and a lot of my supervisors, nobody was really familiar with him, but he is going to be our subject today. And but you know what? He's going to be our subject today. Let me see if I can go on and get started with that. Uh-oh. Okay, so let's go on and get with it, y'all. Oh, and before I skip past, I want you all to also keep in mind about our training, our upcoming training. We have a training coming up on actually Tuesday, on Monday, and that's for social work supervisors. So, and this is a look at it here on July 24th and 25th. And thank you guys who have already signed up. We're going to have that. Hope to see you there. It's a 2-day training for those who are wanting to become supervisors in Alabama. But let's get back to what we're talking about here. So I want to play a quick clip, and I want you to analyze what is going on in this clip and see if you can determine um what is happening with this particular client. Again, what I always kind of like to stress is the ability to be able to just hear just a segment of something and being able to react and stop the client or come back and be able to process what's going on. So I want you to keep a heads up to see if you catch what's going on. And I'm going to play this real quick, and it's going to happen quick. So you got to be on it. But I'm struggling here because nothing is acting right, but that's okay. That's okay. I'm gonna start it anyway at 5, and let me try to share the screen again. And this is just, let me tell you, I used to be scared to death to do something like this because nothing wants to act right, and I'm not a real big tech guy. But we're gonna try to get this thing started. If I could share my screen here, and we're gonna jump into it. So take a listen. All right.
Life you've led. Take me way back to your childhood and the early context.
Both parents are immigrants to the U.S. Mother was born in France, came here, but father was born in Iran. They met in medical school in Europe, and then my mother brought him back with her to the U.S. And then they had me, and they split. My mom had a lot of demons. She had a lot of things she struggled with when I was coming up, so I pretty much was raised by my dad. Had no siblings. It was just me and my dad until I was about 15. He got remarried. It was a short stint in terms of how long I was like kind of in the house. You know, like right at that stage is when you can drive, and I was kind of on my own almost at that point. As soon as I could work and drive, I was kind of out of the house. And then from there, did the thing that most people try and do, which is I worked hard at school, mostly because I just didn't want my dad to be upset with me, which was the main driver for most of my achievement in my career for the first half, was all just trying to gain his approval. Did all the things that I thought he would want me to. Got a job at a government contracting consulting firm, defense contracting. It was space, cyber, and ISR. So it's intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance for the military. Sounded really cool.
All right, let's stop that. Let's stop that. Oh boy, I hope y'all caught that. I hope you all caught that. Um, And let me go and stop it here. And so, when we're in supervision, what I try to do is challenge the group about what they're hearing, to make sure that you're hearing what is being stated by the client, so that you can give the appropriate feedback. And I'm not able to share my screen because I'm having some tech problems here with Evernote, actually, which I love. But so I'm going to ask a question, right? So if you were working with this client, right? This was the client that you was working with. Did you hear anything that stood out right then? That stood out that he said that would make you want to have some pause and kind of reevaluate, and not necessarily reevaluate, but kind of hone in on the meaning behind what was said. And so that was what I asked the group. Of course, we go over group questions and a whole bunch of stuff, but I'm kind of summarizing, and we're going to try to move through it here. And so if you was treating the client, what stood out? And so I actually had some interesting things come across from my supervisees and their response. And for me, I'm already checking out the ACE. For those of you who are familiar with the ACE, I kind of just try to keep it in my head, and the ACE kind of helps you to assess trauma, and it's a whole thing too. We'll talk about it one day. But when I'm thinking about the ACE, I'm thinking like from the mental health status of his mother. So that was one thing that was mentioned. I hope it showed in that clip, because nothing is working right. But the mental health status of his mother, he said that he was separated from his mom, right? He was separated from his mother, and then once he was separated from his mother, he ended up living with his father, right? Okay, according to the ACE, that right there. Well, let's just stick with the mental health first. The mental health status of his mother. It said he was describing her. I don't know if she was neurotic, if she had some mental health problems, but it sounded like possibly that she may have had some mental health problems. And we don't want to be thinking about, how does this impact the child? How does this impact him being a grown man? Are there some factors that we need to keep on the table? Okay, we haven't gotten to the controlling part yet, right? But okay, and so then the parent slip. So according to the ACE, if you have a parent who has a mental health diagnosis, that's going to be a 1 already. Okay, we don't know that for sure, but it's a possibility. Number 2, the parent split. That's another point on the ACE. If your parents have been divorced, if they separated, they weren't together, so that's a 2. So those are the things I'm looking at. I'm also looking at, I don't know if y'all caught this, that he's an immigrant. I don't have time to get into that. But the whole idea is that, and this is how we have to be thinking of as therapists, is that many times in many cultures, and you can't assume that you need to find out if you don't know a lot about the individual's culture. But from the culture that he is talking about, it seemed as though that it was very important. It was a patriarchal, it seemed. And so basically there, if you're an immigrant, your family has been brought over from somewhere, the way he described it later in the video, to have a better life. So, and I've had this in practice and things too, that we have to pay attention to the context of this, because there's different pressures sometimes from children of immigrants, because the parents have made, what is that, right? The parents have made significant sacrifices so that you can have a better life. So many times, like in his situation, the father already had projected thought as far as what he was supposed to do with his life. And so that's where the next point comes up, right? He said, I worked hard, and this is the thing that stood out. I worked hard because I didn't want my dad to be upset with me. From a psychological perspective, you all, what is troubling about this statement coming from a son? Okay. And this is the things that we asked the supervisees that we went over, and we don't have a lot of time to get into it. But one of the things was a fear of disapproval. Okay. Fear of disapproval. Now, what's the problem with that? What's the problem with someone having a fear of disapproval from a parent, right? Well, it's a very important thing, because having a fear of disapproval means, for one thing, that it's possible that the son's motivation for working hard is driven by fear of his father's disapproval, right? The whole reason why he's working hard to do this stuff the way his dad wanted him to do. His dad initially wanted him to go to college to be a doctor, and that's it. No other options, right? So I'm working hard because I want to meet the demands of my father so that I can be in a secure relationship with him. So that's a problem there, right? And what might this suggest when this type of thing happens in a relationship? When you have maybe a son who is discounting his own desires in order to fulfill the desires of his father to please him, what might be the implications of that? Well, a strong need for external validation can develop, and excessive focus on seeking approval from his father. So then we have to even be thinking that I'm going to have to rule out with this client either now at some certain point. Are you still at a point, or has the upbringings of your parent caused you to have somewhat of a focus on external validation? In other words, I kind of need a pat on the back, or I seek the approval of others in order to feel somewhat what I would think is whole, but it's not healthy, right? And so we want to rule that out. What else might this suggest? Got to think from his perspective of self-worth. What happens with a person who thinks like this if they're not in the right mindset concerning self-worth? Are they going to have a high level of self-worth with all this anxiety about pleasing a person? And what happens if they don't please them? Okay, so when we're talking about self-worth, what happens if he doesn't meet his father's approval? If he's saying that he was just doing things so his dad wouldn't be upset at him, that means that he many times was living his life, maybe possibly even paranoid of making bad decisions, anxious about not making the right decisions. And what can that put me at risk for down the road? So these are the things that we're evaluating and helping our clinicians to evaluate with just a few short sentences. This may suggest what happens if he does what he desires to do as a man. Okay, and this may suggest that until a point, we're going to skip past that. Okay, so another question we might ask is what may be the potential, I messed my stuff up, y'all. I'm sorry. What happens if he doesn't have a mindset correction, right? If things aren't really put in their proper place, and I continue to have this fear about not pleasing my father. So, and that's something that you will want to ask them as well. That's something that you can think about yourself. Considering the mindset of this client here, what ends up happening if there is not a change as far as the thinking, right? So I have a list of things that I could think that may end up being a potential negative, just based on the mindset that he has. If things aren't sorted out in his mind, to where instead of having that more external locus of control, where instead of me making things happen, things just kind of happen to me, or things being kind of controlled by my environment instead of me taking it into my own hands, it can be some significant problems. And some things that may potentially develop is that this person might potentially develop a lack of autonomy, and kind of suppress their own feelings and their own desires, and also develop, this is the thing now I have to rule out, like, do you have anger issues? Why? Well, who wouldn't be angry? What person wouldn't be angry that couldn't really be who they wanted to be, or feeling controlled by someone? Depression, unfulfilled dreams, loss of identity. Like if you're so preoccupied with pleasing your father, you feel what I'm saying? If you're so preoccupied with that, then is that going to make you happy? And then what is it that you want? Is many times of what I ask my clients. What is it that you actually want? A lot of times my clients don't even know what they want themselves, because they're so used to being in the mindset of pleasing that parent. So we got low self-worth and even self-destruction. I had a lot of other stuff too that I wanted to mention, but one thing was paranoid about making bad decisions, or even good decisions. Just a paranoia, because if you have somebody over your head just being the judge, then that may make you a little bit anxious. But let's move on, if I could find it too. And this is what I challenge the group. what might be some things that you would suggest for this person if you was working with them that might bring about resolution to give them some level of peace? And when I play the video, it's going to bring some context to the impact of this type of control. Even if it was a cultural situation going on, that doesn't mean that people always are okay with what's happening if you can't be who you are. What does that do for you as a human, right? And so we want to move into this second part, and because I think Hormozy was able to develop, a way of coping that was helpful for him. And we're going to see it may be a little bit extreme, but we're going to see how he was able to work through it. How did he have to view his father in his own eyes, or even himself in his own eyes? How would your client have to view themselves in order to move forward and feel strong and confident about making decisions, even decisions that might impact the intimacy of the relationship with the father? This is all I have because mom, we've been separated, right? So let's see what happened with him, right? And we're going to skip over here, and I guess I need to share it. Give me one moment, y'all. Ooh, we are out of time as usual.
The decision to leave home. And so I started driving across the country. I mean, it took me 6 months to do this. Like between when I decided I really wanted to do this and when I actually did it, it took me 6 months. And I called him when I was like halfway across the United States, and I was like, I'm going to California. I'm going to open a gym. I'm going to get into fitness. And he was like, why are you so extreme? And he like lost it. And then we didn't really talk much for a long time.
When you started realizing that your life was one where you didn't want to wake up in the morning, when you had that job in management consultancy, did you experience suicidal ideation? Is that what you're saying when you say I didn't want to?
So
wake
we
up into my
skipped
life?
it. He said that
never, like I've never had
this
is
he
how
didn't
they
even
kill
want to
themselves.
live.
Nope, never had that. I just always like the idea that I could not wake up the next day sounded good.
When you look back in hindsight from that moment backwards, what are the series of decisions or the things that led you to find yourself in the position? And I ask that because there's a lot of people that can probably relate, and there's probably quite a consistent set of frog pads or stones that one is walking down for whatever reason that lead you to a position where you go, what the fuck, whose life is this?
I think that like the one line summary for me was that like I felt like I had to let my dad's dream die for mine to live. And I felt like my entire life it had always up to that point had been like go to the school, do these studies. I mean, it's a common thing. Like it's not like I had something that a lot of people don't have. Many people, and to be fair, I'm very grateful for the skills, discipline, et cetera, that instilled in me. Because I think you have the hard hand of an authoritarian parent when you're growing up, and it teaches you a lot of skills. And then the flip side is if you have a very laissez-faire parent, like you never learn those skills, which then benefit you later. So who knows? But for me, I knew that he just wanted me to be a doctor. That's what he was. That would have been his dream. I went to school as pre-med. And then I was like, even changing my degree from pre-med to just a business degree was like a huge deal. But he was okay with that as long as I followed like the business path. And so when I did my 2 years of consulting, which is kind of the typical like 2 to 4 years you do consulting and then you apply to go to business school. When I was going through that process, I was answering the question for like the Harvard MBA, and it was like, how will Harvard MBA help your short and long-term goals? And I sat there for like 2 days trying to answer the question. And I was like, it just isn't. I want to start a business. And so that was when I kept trying to, start that conversation with my dad, and it just wasn't really happening. And so that was kind of the breaking point for me. Was like I just felt terrible about my life, and I didn't like the way it was going. And for me, it was such a key point because the biggest line of reasoning I had for myself in order to convince myself to confront my father, or at least disappoint my father, or the version of myself that he wanted me to be, was to say that like I have to be comfortable dying in his eyes. And a lot of people and many people might think that was hyperbole, but for me, it was very true. Like I knew that I would die in his eyes, and I did. To give you context, so I had the gyms, and I opened up multiple after that. Got to about 6 locations, sold those, started a gym turnaround business, did that for 2 years. All the while, we weren't really, we were like okay in touch. And then we started the licensing business, which is Gym Launch, and that's the one that like really took off. And we hadn't been super in touch, and I get a call out of the blue, and he wasn't like a cold call, I mean? I was like, this is weird. So I pick up the phone, and he's like, you're going to want to sit down for this. And I was like, okay, what's up? I was thinking like cancer, I mean, I'm just like, what is it going to be? He was like, I'm sorry. And I was like, for what? He was like, everything. I was like, okay. And I was very angry still because, and this is what I told him. So I was like, that point when people like get on stage and they accept the awards, and mind you, at this point, I think we're probably taking home $1.5 million a month. You know what I mean? And take home like personal income from the license. It was a decent size, like, I'm not, you know, conglomerate like public, but it's a decent sized business. And I was like, you know, when people get on stage and they accept awards for things, I was like, the first thing they always say is like, hey, I just want to thank my mom and dad for always believing in me. And I was like, I'm not going to say that. I was like, because you didn't. I was like, you're only saying this now once everyone believed, because it's not belief anymore. It's fact. It's evidence. I was like, I was like, this apology means nothing to me. And besides that, I stopped caring what you thought 6 years ago, which is why I left. And so I had like, that's like, I could have just accepted it, and I didn't do that.
How do you feel about that?
I probably, like today, I probably would have said thanks. I appreciate it. I know where he was trying. He was trying to extend an olive branch, and I just wasn't there. I was still seething. I was still very angry that I had not gotten any support during that process. And maybe that was very woe is me. But I was still very angry at that point.
I'm going to go on and stop it
You have
here
to give also a little bit of context.
if I can.
I was like, well, we'll see how long it lasts. You're joking. No.
But he just mentioned that even with his father apologizing, you know, and he didn't accept the apology, his father said, well, we'll see how long that lasts. You know, one of my clinicians asked the question to group, how would this person try to establish a sense of control? And, you know, I think that's going to be different for each client, just depending on how they adjust to not having control over their lives, because they're yielding to a mother or yielding to a father who is controlling, authoritarian, and things like that. But one thing I do remember, I was watching this thing about on television, I think it was the Pace sisters. It's so many different ways that people learn to adapt to gain control. And it was just interesting with them, seeing them on Yala one time, and how they were talking about food. They learn to gain control through food. And these are some maladaptive ways that often we'll look to things like this just to feel that we can do what we need to do without someone being over us. When the women would sit down, and most of them were pretty heavy, and when they would sit down and eat, nobody was bothering them. Nobody was trying to control them. So they learned to get their freedom in food. I had one client to tell me that they learned to get their freedom by just going and washing dishes, because when they would wash the dishes or clean, then they didn't have to worry about the abuse. You feel what I'm saying? But then these things often impact us later in different ways when things are not resolved. Okay. And so I think that it's important, just looking at his growth and development, to think about this is not a way that I would subscribe to someone to just, in a sense, just cancel somebody off. But I do respect the fact that he said, I felt like I had to die to my dad, that I felt that my dad's dream had to die so that I could live. And that's okay. That's a boundary, y'all. That's a boundary. But just be thinking about, ways to work with your clients in way where the treatment, doesn't have to take them away from the parent, but also where things are put on the table that, hey, this may have to happen. So if it does have to happen, then you also want to help the client. You want to answer questions for them above or before they get to it. What will that look like? Because many times they feel that they cannot live without a parent. And these are adults still in this situation many times when the boundaries have not been established. I better end because I think I'm way over time, but I hope this is helpful. But these are some of the things we talk about in supervision. And I hope that you're able to implement some of these things, or get some ideas from this, or help to, find some, reasonable ways to work with your clients and to where you can be effective the way that you want to be. I'm going to go on and check out for this week. We'll see y'all next week, and y'all take care until then. All right now. Bye.